Well, hello and welcome into this edition of the BLEAV in Nationals podcast. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at BLEAV in Nats. So in this edition of the BLEAV in Nationals podcast, the time is here that the Nationals get back in action as they prepare to take on the Cubs on Thursday night. And I, for one, am the most excited that we are going to see what this new young team looks like. We're going to see how the new young leadership group of this team handles any obstacles that are thrown their way. And a real feeling of optimism for me entering into this season that I have no dreams of grandeur. I don't think they're going to win the East. I surely don't think they're going to win the World Series. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like they're headed in the right direction. I'm going to go all the way and say back to 2019 that it really felt like after the World Series that the wheel really started wobbling and the big pieces started leaving town, Scherzer and Juan Soto and Trey Turner, and it's like madness. And we were told for the longest time to trust the system under Mike Rizzo, under Davey Martinez, and there was a feeling of, yeah, we should trust these guys. This leadership group is what got us to win a World Series. What a novel thought. But, for me, that quickly evaporated when I heard Rizzo say, this team is going to be competitive next year. No, check that the year after that and after that. And well, here we are, 2026, with a new leadership group and Paul Toboni, head of baseball ops. You have Blake Butera, the new young manager, and Ani Colombi, the GM, that there is a feeling like, hey, this group knows how to do good things. At least Toboni does. I know he does. And Ani Colombi, I guess, as far as Blake Butera is concerned, does not have a tremendous amount of experience behind the bench, but I'm not going to fault him for that. I think he has a rapport. I think this leadership group has what it takes to at least steer this team in the right direction. That I think for the longest time, it felt like this team was rudderless, that they would add these stopgap measures, these Band-Aids in the offseason, because the belief was, well, the reinforcements are on their way. They just need a little bit more time to marinate down in the minors. So let's talk about that. We'll talk about in this episode a trade here as of late. One trade that didn't get me real excited, I guess I'm going to say the trade that saw the Nationals acquire Yorbit Vivas. A bit later, we'll talk about Brady House is on the verge of a breakout season. Then we'll talk about the offense struggles and why they might get worse before they get better. Also talk about Josiah Gray. And because this is the BLEAV in Nationals podcast, a more long-form version of the show, we'll talk about the Nationals finally have a real farm system, upside versus reality, and velocity spikes, risky arms, and future bullpen monsters. And if this is your first time watching the show, first of all, welcome. Thank you for joining me. I usually do a show nearly 5 days a week called the Nats Minutecast, about a 15-minute podcast that gets you caught up on the Nats. This is the long-form version of that show, also on the BLEAV Network. This show, my aim is to come to you at least weekly in a longer form, and also going to have it on YouTube as well. So make sure and subscribe on all your favorite podcatchers and on YouTube as well. So let's just dive right into it here. Talking about why the Yorbit Vivas trade screams urgency. Because the Nationals made the deal because they don't trust their current infield. That's it. That should be quite apparent when you see that, and they needed a real big league option immediately. So let's really unpack this one, because this is one of those moves I think that looks small, but it actually tells you a ton about where this organization is mentally. Because you go out, right, and you acquire Yorbit Vivas from the New York Yankees, and you give up Sean Paul Leanon. And at first glance, if you're anything like me, you're like, wait, what? Who? Google search, who is this guy? Because you take a look at Leanon, 21 years old, strikeout stuff, one of the best changeups in the system. And I'm going to break it down in this first segment, but I'm going to be honest with you. I understand it. I don't love it. And I kind of wonder, and I think to myself, why was Vivas the option? I know that it is said that he ran out of options with the New York Yankees and all of that, but I'm going to trust the amateur team. I'm going to trust the guys that do the scouting, that kind of thing, that they see something in Yorbit that made it necessitate trading Sean Paul Lehnen. Because like I say, 21 years old, strikeout stuff, one of the best changeups in the system, and you trade him what for a utility infielder? Now, that's not nothing. That's the kind of arm rebuilding teams usually keep, right? So why did they do it? That's the question. Because the Nationals are done pretending that development alone is enough. And that's the shift here, right? Because the front office, Paul Toboni, the new regime, they're not just collecting prospects anymore. They're starting to ask the questions: who can actually help us play competitive baseball in April? That we don't want to get so behind everything right out of the gate that things get ugly. Again, I have no dreams of grandeur for this year's Nationals team. With that said, I don't want this team to totally tank out either, right? I don't want them, because I think, to a certain extent with young players, if you start losing right out of the gate, that they kind of check out mentally. They're not prepared for that kind of loserdom, I guess you could say. And the answers internally were not good enough because, let's be real here, Jose Tena hasn't locked anything down. Nazem Nunez is still more glove than bat, and Brady House, we hope he's ready, but you can't bank on it. So what do? You go out and get a guy like Vivas. Now, let's not pretend anything. Let's not pretend that he's a difference maker, because he's not. But he's something the Nationals have lacked: a competent professional hitter. And look at his minor league track record: 270 hitter, gets on base, steals bigs, plays multiple positions. That's a real bench piece. And that's all you should really look at, period. Don't widen the lens too much. Don't take the plane up to 30,000 foot view. That's what it is. They needed a utility infielder, and what they had internally was not enough. That's the perception anyway. And this team has been running out of guys who are, let's be honest, not ready. So the move is about raising the floor. And I actually think fans underestimate how important this is, because when your floor is too low, it kills development. If every game is sloppy, if every bat is a learning experiment, if every defensive play is shaky, you're not building anything. You're surviving. So bringing in Vivas, that's stabilizing the ecosystem. But here's where I push back a little bit, right? You gave up upside, because if Sean Paul Lehnen figures it out and you traded him for Vivas, you're going to be thinking like, wow, that was a swing and a miss by Paul Toboni, right? But if he finds a second pitch, if his command clicks, that's a mid-rotation arm or a nasty reliever, and those guys matter. So this trade is basically saying we're willing to sacrifice future variance for present stability. And I get it. I do. I understand it, but I don't love it, because it also tells you something else. The leash on this rebuild, it might be getting shorter. The Lerners don't want this team to stink it up out there. That, we brought in new leaders. I understand it's going to be a learning curve, but you can't, nosedive. You can't facepalm and just say that's going to be okay because we're rebuilding. There needs to be signs of growth, that the Nationals fans have been patient for long enough that we need to see improvement. And you talk about Cruz, for example. Tell me if you had that on your bingo card to start the season, that he was going to be playing in AAA to start the season. That either these players are passengers, or they're, contributors, or are they a part of the long-term answer? And I'm going to be honest with you, that's what this is about, that there was not enough feelings that internally there was a good utility infielder that could fit the bill. A bit surprising. There are options, right, but not proven. And I think that Toboni's like, no, we need to fix this. We need some sort of stability if things go off the rails here a little bit. Because you don't make the move, which I just spoke of, if you're fully comfortable being bad. You make this move when you're like, okay, we need to look like a real team now. And that's where we're at. Because make no mistake about it, there's a tremendous amount of pride in that leadership group. Toboni comes from the Red Sox, an organization, a ball club that has a long history of doing great things, that you just don't simply crumple that all up and throw it away. So I applaud the decision, and it seems like the Nationals are finally heading in the right direction, and it was one of the things that I wasn't sure what kind of team or what kind of decisions they're going to make. But for me, it seems like the right decision. All right, so coming up here after the break, Brady House breakout. But now the pressure is real. I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of the BLEAV in Nationals podcast, part of the BLEAV Podcast Network. Again, this is the long-form version of the Nats Minutecast, a bit more extensive, so thank you for joining me. Let's talk about a guy next. Third base, Brady House. Is this going to be the season? Again, in segment one, I spoke about, Dylan Cruz, and the feeling was that he was going to be the answer in right field. There was some questions about Jacob Young, maybe center field, but starting the season in AAA. So a bit different. We know that it was not a good spring for Dylan Cruz and was an exceptionally good spring for Brady House. But how is that going to translate to the regular season? So let's break that down here in the next segment of today's show, because Brady House breakout, but the pressure is real. Brady House might be breaking out, but has to, because the lineup needs a cornerstone immediately. And I'll say this right out there with the lineup, because everything we just talked about, it puts the spotlight directly on Brady House. I spoke about the deal that brought in Vivas and moved out Leanin. Was that the right decision? Because, well, they thought there was not enough infield, like utility depth, that we need a guy like Brady House to be that cornerstone at third. We've needed it for a while. It's been a turnstile. What we have seen out there has simply not worked. You think about Rendon, who with the Nationals was good. You think about Zimmerman before he moved over to first was good. But then you also had the Carter Kieboom experiment and the relative turnstile that has been through there ever since. We need the cornerstone. We need a franchise third baseman. Is Brady House the guy? I'm not going to say that he is yet, because I mean directly, because before you could say, hey, if he breaks out, great. Now it's like we need Brady House to break out. And it's a completely different conversation. Now, do I believe in it? Yeah, I do, because the changes are real. And it's all about, proof. I don't want to hear that, he did this or that in the off season. What did he look like in spring training? We talked about it. Better swing decisions, lower chase rate, more hard contact, and pull side power showing up. Now, what is that? That is legitimate development. That's not just spring noise. But here's, where everything gets tricky, as it always does. Pressure changes everything. That he played well against minor league talent, against prospects, against some major league talent. But how is Brady House going to perform this season, in the 2026 season, against the best in the league? Now, I know we've seen him before in the bigs, but what I'm talking about is I think there's more pressure on him right now than there was ever before, because we need to see proof. Because now you're not just a young player developing, you're the guy expected to stabilize the lineup. And now, that's a lot to throw at someone still trying to figure it out, especially when the rest of the offense, let's be honest, is shaky. Dylan Cruz, AAA, James Wood is still raw, and supporting pieces inconsistent. So ultimately, where does that leave Brady House? In the middle of everything. And I'll say this, if he handles it, that's when someone is a cornerstone. Because talent is one thing. Handling pressure at the big league level, that's what separates guys. Now, does he need to be perfect? No. I would like to see near perfection, of course, but he needs to be impactful. There needs to be a sign that, yes, as a matter of fact, he is our answer at third base. And it might not come straight out of the gate, right? We might need to see him ramp up. I'm not setting projections for him that he needs to get shot straight to the moon right out of the gate. But what we need to see is a sign, right, that he is going to be the guy. He needs to drive the ball, change games occasionally, and be a presence in the lineup. And if he does that, this whole rebuild starts to feel real, because every rebuild needs that guy. And right now, the closest thing the Nationals have to it is him. And I know that there are the big bats in the lineup. I know that James Wood, I expect to be good. I expect to see CJ Abrams take steps forward this year. But we need to see Brady House in particular, specifically, we need to see his game take off. We need him to be that guy. So yeah, I'm still in on the breakout, but now it's not about existing and, just holding your time. It's about proving that you belong on this team. Not just, I'm the placeholder that, hey, remember me, I'm that guy. We need to see proof, a proof of concept that, as a matter of fact, he is the guy for the Nationals, the long-term answer at third base. All right, next, let's pivot to, a guy, Josiah Gray, right? That we take a look at Josiah, a guy that injuries have been the theme of his young career. But let's not forget about what the hopes, the projections, the dreams of Josiah Gray, where he was going to fit in with the Nationals. A rough start for him. Josiah Gray, the injury changes the timeline, and combined with offensive struggles, this team could stumble out of the gates. Now, I say that, slightly not wholeheartedly, as I don't think that there was a lot of questions about Josiah Gray. And as a matter of fact, even before he got injured, if he was going to make the starting rotation, that we can't give him that spot if we don't know that he's ready for it. Because we got to talk about this, because this might actually be the biggest story. Josiah Gray, 60-day IL flexor strain after already going through Tommy John. And you see that with certain players, don't you? That it's just not lucky. You saw Cade Cavalli injured a long period of time and, going to be your starting day opener. But for Josiah Gray, it just seems to be bad luck, injury after injury after injury. And it's brutal, right? Because this was supposed to be part of the comeback. This was supposed to be the year he reestablishes himself. Instead, another setback, another delay, and now you're looking at a guy who hasn't been a factor for 2 years. And I'm going to be honest with you, that changes everything, because remember, this was a cornerstone piece, if you don't remember, from the Max Scherzer and Trey Turner trade. That, Max Scherzer leaving was tough. Trey Turner, still my favorite shortstop, was tough. He was supposed to be the anchoring piece. Now it's uncertainty. And that uncertainty bleeds into everything, because if your rotation isn't stable, and I'm not saying it's not stable. I thought that it was kind of a long shot, even if he was healthy, to make the opening day rotation. Your offense is already struggling. Where are your wins coming from? Now the question is, now let's tie it all together. The offense is trying to reinvent itself. We talked about more power, more lift, more modern approach, but right now it's not working consistently. And now you don't even have the luxury of strong pitching to carry you early. At least one of the pieces, right? I think that it was apparent in spring training that he might not be the guy. And, to be honest with you, I think the Nationals would have been better for it if he was good to go. So this is where it gets rough. Last April, April might not be pretty. And I think fans need to prepare for that this team might not be a moonshot right out of the gate, because this isn't about performance. It's about timing. The offense isn't ready. The pitching isn't stable, and the schedule not forgiving. So where do I land? I'm concerned, not long-term, but short-term, because this team might take some early hits before things start to click. That the optimism, the excitement about this young team, that is only going to last for so long, that we are going to need to see a proof of concept that this team is headed in the right direction. Again, I have no dreams of grandeur. I've said that a couple times in this episode, but what I want to see is proof that they're at least at a minimum heading in the right direction. That we saw, that we can perceive that this player, Brady House, is going to be third base. We can see that James Wood is locking it in. in left field. We can see the catching. Is it going to be K-Bear Ruiz? Is it going to be Millis? Is it going to be Ford? That I want certain things to be known, that this isn't just another wasted season. And some people, it depends upon where your bar is at. Some people perceive that if you don't make it to the playoffs, it's wasted. If you don't make it to the World Series, it's wasted. I don't think that is the case. But what I want to see as a Nationals fan, as a Nationals podcaster, is steps in the right direction, right? That's what I want to see, that there's improvement, that, we knew that Rizzo wasn't right. We knew that Martinez wasn't right. So we made a change. We brought in all this technology, that we added all these new great coaches. I need to see that it was worth it. And I think that it is. I don't want to, get down in the dumps on this team right now, but I don't want this team floundering, because the one thing I know from being a podcaster for the Capitals, for a football team and baseball as well, is that a young player, and you can draw lines right to Dylan Cruz here, that when they struggle, it shatters their confidence. And you take a look at a guy like Brady House, like Dylan Cruz, who knocked it out of the park at LSU and has struggled on the big stage. And a lot of that, we could say is because they fast-tracked him. That under the old leadership, they didn't want to overcook players, so they wanted to shoot them right to the bigs. And I think that, maybe a player like Dylan Cruz is weaker for that. Is he ever going to find his way? It was Skeens. It was Cruz. The Nationals got Cruz. At the end of the day, I would have been happier with Skeens. Sorry, Nationals fans, that's where I'm at. And I really hope that Cruz can turn into that player. But that's what I'm talking about. I want to see proof. Where is Cruz at? He's starting the season in AAA. However, if he can figure it out on the smaller stage, smaller stadiums, less eyes on him, then maybe there's a spot for him on this team. That's what I want to figure out. This, for me, the 2026 season is still all about assessment. But I don't want it to be, like I said, another wasted year where like they're going to figure it out sooner than later. All right, so coming up here after the break, the Nationals finally have a legit player development pipeline. I'll break it all down straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of the BLEAV Nationals podcast, part of the BLEAV Podcast Network. So let's talk about prospect, the pipeline. That it's looking a lot better, and better days lie ahead. That I don't know what kind of season the Nationals are going to have in 2026. I think it's going to be, like I said, assessment. It's going to be about learning. And if they could surprise me, wow, wouldn't that be something? 500 baseball in DC. What? But I think that that's where we're at. So let's talk about prospects here in the final segment of today's show, because here's the thing. For the first time, honestly, since the early, post-World Series teardown, the Nationals actually look like they know what they're doing development-wise. And that's not nothing, right? Because under Mike Rizzo, let's be real here, we saw a lot of rushed prospects, i.e., just spoke about him, Dylan Cruz. Weird timelines, mixed messages, guys getting called up before they were ready. And now you've got Paul Toboni coming in and basically saying, we're building a development monster. I love that. And yeah, that sounds like front office speak, but the early signs, they actually back it up. Velocity is up across the system. Swing decisions are being tracked and adjusted, and messaging is finally aligned. Like modern baseball, right? We're not like a 2012 club in 2026. This is modern baseball, and that is the biggest shift. They're not forcing guys. They're being patient. Harry Ford into the majors just to plug holes. They're letting development happen. They're not forcing Harry Ford, rather, into the bigs. They're letting development happen, and that matters. Because if this system, even 50% of these guys, you're suddenly not rebuilding anymore, you're arriving. And that's encouraging, right? That I think there was a feeling, many podcasters, I spoke about it myself, many blog writers that cover the Nationals, thought that Harry Ford was going to battle for that starting job. As it turns out, not the case, not at least out of the gate. I think it's going to be one of the most exciting storylines to follow. Harry Ford, that is K-Bear Ruiz the guy? He had concussion issues last year. But ultimately for me has never been the guy like that's our catcher for the long term. And then you would have like Millis in the mix there as well. That I think it's Harry Ford's game. If he can kill it in the minors and say K-Bear, stumbles a little bit, I think he's going to get an opportunity. But the position players have upside, but comes real questions. So let's talk about bats. And yeah, there's excitement, but also a lot of ifs, right? Harry Ford, a future answer or just solid piece? Because for me, Ford is fascinating. You hear legit hit tool. You hear 15 to 20 homer potential, and you think, okay, that's your catcher of the future. But then scouts are like, yeah, he's good, but not a difference maker. And that's where I'm at too, right? Like, is he an all-star? Probably not. Is he a stabilizer behind the plate? Yeah, I buy that. And honestly, the Nationals need that. Why? Because if K-Bear Ruiz hasn't locked that spot down, he's your guy. Seaver King, boom or bust. King might be the most important bat in this system, not named Willits. And man, this one is tricky. When you take a look at him, ground ball issues, questionable defensive home, but Arizona Fall League breakout. And now we're hearing ground ball rate dropping, contact point improving, and better swing decisions. That is development. That's coaching. That's what this new regime is supposed to do. But I'll say it, if King doesn't unlock power, he's just another guy. And then we're talking about here Ronnie Cruz, a Macroni, Yerman. Those are your lottery tickets. Cruz. Big exit velos for his age, needs better swing decisions. And then you have as well as Jermaine, insane DSL numbers, play discipline already advanced. And those are the guys who can flip a rebuild fast if they hit, but they are also years away. So don't rush it. That is the thread. That is the theme. For a lot of these young players, you'll have to forgive me, their names don't necessarily roll off my tongue. I'm getting used to them here. But those are your building blocks that we don't want to rush along. But here's the thing. The pitching development jump is real, but it is risky. Because here's where things get a little spicy, right? The Nationals are clearly doing something with pitching. And you take a look at Davian Garcia, 93 to 94, now 97 to 98. Low arm slot, swing and miss potential. That's not normal improvement. That's system-wide changes. Same things goes with Yoel Tadea, 6'8", 96 miles per hour, 5-pitch mix. But here's the catch. Scouts don't love the secondaries. And if you don't have secondaries, you're a reliever. The polished but quiet arm is Jackson Kent. Kent might be the sneaky important one. Improved pitch shapes, better delivery, consistency in starts. He's not flashy, but he might be the guy who actually sticks in a rotation. And right now, the Nationals need that. The wild card, Miguel Sime. This is the dude, 18 years old, triple-digit fastball. And let me say that again, triple-digit. Now when you take a look at it, that's how you become a top 3 prospect overnight. But here's the caveat. No real secondary yet. Reliever risk still if the slider develops. You're talking about a legit weapon. So final thought here on this segment, big picture, the Nationals finally have a plan, a development alignment, real upside across the system. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is still a prove-it farm system, that it is better than it once was, because we've seen this hype before in DC before. This time, though, it feels different. New leadership. It feels like the guys in place know what they're doing. And honestly, that might be the most important takeaway of all, that finally the Nationals are trending in the right direction. Again, I want to see proof of that, right? But when we see Thursday, under the big lights, relatively speaking, we will see if these players are good. Who rose to the challenge, who needs some work, and is this team going to be legit? We can't say that in game number 1, but what we'll be able to tell is what this team looks like, the players on the field against some elite talent. and make adjustments on the fly. Again, the thing I like about Toboni is I don't feel like if it doesn't work, it's going to just be a garbage season. He's going to make a change. And as a Nationals fan, that is the most encouraging part. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the BLEAV the Nationals podcast, a long-form version of the Nats Minutecast. Follow both of the shows on Apple, Spotify, also on YouTube here, the BLEAV the Nationals podcast. So exciting. I'll have the links for you in the show notes. Let's get hype. Let's get hype for Nationals baseball and make the BLEAV the Nationals podcast and the Nats Minutecast your home for Nationals baseball. I'll talk to you again next time.